Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PMO Virtual Summit. I'm Hussain Bandukwala, Chief PMO Coach at Prioritise Consulting, and your host and founder at PMO Virtual Summit. Firstly, if you're watching this video or listening to it, I really appreciate you signing up for the summit and participating in it. I really hope that you're enjoying it as much as I did putting it together. Now, I'm going to be talking to you about setting up a PMO, wow them in 100 days. And I chose this topic specifically because PMOs are seen as an entity that really slows things down. That's the perception out there. You can really make things move quickly and fast by setting up a PMO. We'll talk a bit more about that. Now, one reason why I'm in this business and why I set up this PMO virtual summit is because PMOs aren't doing that great. And there are many reasons for that. But one of the core reasons is the evolution, nurturing, and education of the people leading the PMOs. That's the PMO leaders. And it's not no fault of their own. A lot of the PMO leaders that I have known and I've spoken with, and hey, that's happened to me as well, have been thrown into this role accidentally. And so while you're struggling to learn the ropes and have to manage everything else on the side, there are chances that you might slip up. And so through this presentation, what I want to do is make sure that you can put your best foot forward and really wow your stakeholders, your sponsors, and your team and set up your PMO with confidence. I want to take a quick step into what a PMO is and who is a PMO leader, right? So to me, a PMO is any department, just like IT, just like finance, just like marketing. A project management office is a business entity, a department, which is there to help the organization meet its business goals. Now, I break up a PMO into three different buckets: functional, structural, and disciplinary. Those are the three components, I would say, that really form a PMO. So when you look at the functional aspect, a PMO could just be a standard setting body or a governance body that is there to not only just set the standards, but also to make sure that it's governing the standards as well. Now, take it a further level down, it could also help in the delivery or execution of projects. That means it's not only making sure that the standards are set and that the governance is in place, but that it's taking the lead and making sure that others are following their suit in delivering the projects in that consistent and predictable way. And then finally, one of the functions of a PMO is to sit at the strategy table with top executives and leadership within the organization and really help them understand and work with them to carve out what are some of the strategic angles that could help meet the business really hit its targets that it's meant to do. So that's from a functional perspective. Now, if you look at the structure of a PMO, that's your typical people, process, tools that you have there, and that really define really the three legs of a PMO are there. Now, just like for an IT department, they take care of all of their needs. They take care of all of business needs by managing tech and data. Marketing takes care of an organization's need by taking care of their campaigns, collateral, branding, etc. The accounting departments takes care of all of the business needs by managing the books, etc. The project management office takes care of everything related to a project. Now, what this means is that, yes, making sure that the projects are on time, on budget, within scope, at quality, that's there. But the projects are meant to be done with a purpose. There are certain benefits for why the projects are being done. And if those aren't realized, then it doesn't really matter whether projects are on time or on budget. That benefits realization, making sure the right projects are happening at the right time by the right people, that in itself is one of the core assets, the core responsibilities of a PMO. And so when you're looking at it from a disciplinary perspective, you carve out project management as a means to an end for the PMO to make sure that it meets its organization's needs. You're looking at resources, resource management, change management, communication management, and obviously the execution management of projects. So, in a nutshell, that is what a project management office is. And a project management office leader is someone who's there to set up, evolve, and manage the operations of a project management office. Um, there are many permutations and combinations of the functional structures and the disciplinary pieces that would come together, and that is all dependent on what the needs of the organization are. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But before we do that, let's talk a bit about the PMO leader, right? So if you're someone who's aspiring to be a PMO leader, if you're someone who's actually a PMO leader for the first time and really trying to figure out, how do I get this done? This presentation is specifically for you. But one thing that I want to talk about, one thing that's of a lot of interest to me, is how do people become PMO leaders, right? So what I have seen are, and the way I categorize this is in two key buckets. Firstly, I think that the journey of a PMO leader from a conventional perspective. Now, traditionally and historically, PMOs have been associated with tech, with IT. If it's an IT department, if it's a technology department, a PMO has to be a part of it. A PMO leader typically, reports under the leadership of technology, whether it's the CIO, the CTO, etc., VP of IT, whoever you have. But the conventional notion of someone becoming a PMO leader might be that someone is a business analyst or a coordinator, and then they get into the project management role. They elevate themselves to become a portfolio manager and then ultimately a PMO leader. Or you could be, let's say, a tester who then becomes a program manager and then a PMO leader. And you can have a lot of permutations and combinations for that. And these are only some of the roles out there. I haven't even mentioned other roles like, let's say, database manager or an architect, whoever, right? But those are some of the things. Anyone who's associated within the tech side of things ultimately then becomes a PMO leader, and that's the conventional notion. The other bucket to me is the non-conventional journey of a PMO leader. And this is where sort of the accidental piece happens as well. But sometimes what happens is that you have someone within an organization who's just fed up with the way things are done within an organization. In fact, that's something that happened with one of my clients. He was a business analyst within an organization, and he really didn't enjoy the way the projects were being managed within his organization. There was no consistency, there was no predictability, there was no outcome. It was sort of a wild, wild west situation if you have, where everybody's doing their own thing. And so he decided to roll up his sleeves, approach his management, indicated that he'd like to go ahead and set up a project management office because he saw the need. He would do that in addition to his role of being a business analyst. And then ultimately, through some time, he was able to go ahead and set up a PMO, and that really led him to propel within his career and became the head of customer service within his organization. So a huge jump from a career perspective. But those situations do exist, and then oftentimes someone who is within the strategy department or within the operations department, that they just get thrust into the role of a PMO leader if the executives feel that a PMO needs to be set up and can't find anyone else who might be suitable within an organization. So, the thing of interest to me though is every time I hold webinars, I usually talk about these two possible journeys, and then I do a survey out there. And that's a real-time survey of all the attendees, and I ask them if they're PMO leaders, which journey did they come through? And I see that it's a good mix of, like 60-30 between conventional to non-conventional, or even 55-45% between conventional and non-conventional. And so what that tells me is that even though we don't really hear about the non-conventional pieces that much, there are many people out there who do follow that journey. So for all of you who are listening to this, who are viewing this presentation, if you feel that you are someone who is not on your traditional typical project management path, but are working currently in some other discipline or in another domain, if the leadership role within the PMO is of interest to you, you can get there. And so what that means is that while you can make sure that you can carve out your career path to become a PMO leader, you have to take the conscientious steps to get yourself ready for that. And so with that, I do want to talk about what skills are needed for the leadership role of a PMO, right? So we talked about the different possible ways of getting there, and you and I know that no two PMOs are the same. Every organization has different needs, and every industry has different needs. So with each PMO comes the varying needs of and skill sets that the PMO leader needs to bring in front of it. So let's take a look at some of the key components, the key skill sets that are needed within the project management office leadership role. So let's start off with the no-brainer, which is the program or project management role, right? So one of the times that one other time that I worked with a client was pretty interesting. He was a strategy consultant, and he didn't have any project management experience in the past. He was pushed in to set up a PMO just because he was with the organization that he was working with for quite some time. He understood the ins and outs really well. He, like I mentioned, has strategy consulting background, so he knew how to work through the business components of things, and he'd already built some key relationships within the organization. And so in order to become a project management office leader, he did go about taking a 5-day course or so for project management to really understand what it is, what the discipline is all about, and then off he went in terms of setting up a PMO. Now, obviously, his situation was unique. It was a small organization, rapidly growing but small in nature still, and then he'd been there for a while, so he knew the right people there to make sure that he could work through the relationships and make things move for the project management office. So even though you may not have prior project management experience and still become a project management office leader, it is recommended that you do have this skill set. Not just because uh, it will not only help you better relate yourself to the team and understand its pain points, but also setting up a project management office in general is like a project in itself, and we'll talk a bit about that as we move on into the next part of our presentation. But making sure that your projects are on time, on schedule, and quality, how to work through the different assets of prioritization, that is key and something that you should certainly have as a project management office leader. Moving on to the organizational skill sets. Now, I did mention that the purpose of the project management office is to make sure that it uses project management as its tool, as a means to make sure that its business, its organization meets its needs, meets its strategy. And so if you just have project management experience and you don't have any organizational experience like strategy management, cost center accounting, understanding of regulatory needs and principles, um, you will fall short in communicating and being at the same table as the key leadership within the organization. Ultimately, as a PMO leader, you do need to go about making sure that you are elevating your PMO to that level. Maybe not right at the beginning of the PMO, but as it evolves, that is something that you ultimately may need to strive towards. And so having organizational skills is a valuable asset to an organization as a PMO leader. Now, one thing that I typically say is that if you have project management office skills, get the organizational skills. And if you have the organizational skills, get the project management skills. That that tandem, that duo, that combo is a rock solid one for a PMO leader to have. The next one is the next category is the business specific type of skills. Now, there are many PMOs out there that are built specifically for a department within an organization. So for example, you may have a massive HR department within an organization, which might have a ton of different projects and therefore may require a PMO of its own. Similarly, an IT department, which is typically the key, that could have an IT specific PMO, or even a marketing department, if you will. And so if you have specific skills to that department. So for instance, if you have a great understanding of HR policy, if you're working for an HR PMO, if you're leading an HR PMO, or if you might have a tech background, if you're setting up and leading the charge for a tech or an IT PMO, those skill sets are going to be extremely helpful, because that way you're not just following the lead of the department head, but you're also making sure that you're contributing based on your own knowledge and experience how things could be better, how things could be facilitated faster, in terms of not only just the processes and outcomes, but also understanding what the industry is moving towards, and how that department, how the PMO can help that department be the best one of its kind in the industry. And then finally, and the most important, is the people skills. There are good chances that if you have become a PMO leader, you do have a good set of people skills, which means negotiation, influencing, managing politics, communication, facilitation, presentation. Uh, all these skills are a valuable asset. They not only help you communicate up and down, but also help you manage up, down, and sideways, which you will need to do as a PMO leader. And so if there's any skills that you need to go ahead and get immediately, if you are to become a PMO leader, then making sure that you have a strong strength in in people skills is key. So to recap, my recommendation is to make sure that the project management as well as the people skills are an absolute must. The business skills are specific to the type of PMOs, but organizational skills are also extremely important when you need to become a PMO leader. Now, you're a PMO leader. You've gotten all these skills. The right opportunity came across. You become a PMO leader. Congratulations. But what's next? Well, no matter if you're setting up a PMO for the first time, if you're a first-time PMO leader, if you're a seventh-time PMO leader or 10th-time PMO leader, no matter what that situation is, as soon as you get that opportunity, you are considered as an expert in setting up a PMO. The clock starts ticking and you have to get on your way. So what do you do? Well, let's talk a bit about just the mindset as you start about that journey of setting up a PMO. Well, first and foremost, I do want to talk about the 100-day mindset, right? So when the president of the United States or any head of state becomes the leader, gets appointed on that opportunity, their 100 days are measured. And typically the perception set within those first 100 days carries on through the rest of their tenure. And that is the case for any leader. And as a PMO leader, you shouldn't be treated differently as well. Now, there are a lot of things that I've seen, a lot of times that I've seen that that's really not the expectation from a PMO leader. But if you have that mindset and if you bring that forward within that organization, not only make an incredible impression, but you will also go about setting yourself up for success. So having that 100-day mindset is the key. And what that means, what you bring up with that 100-day mindset, firstly, is the awareness, right, of who are the right people you need to work with, what are the current challenges within the organization, how do you navigate the landscape that is your current entity, and so on. In addition to that, having the right attitude, that can-do attitude, is key. Remember, PMOs in general are considered as gatekeepers, someone who slows things down, right? So when somebody approaches you for something and you say, oh no, sorry, we can't do it, well, you're just validating their perceptions, right? Having that can-do attitude is key, right? And which doesn't mean that you say yes to everything, but you say, sure, let me think, let's talk about that. Let's evaluate this. And if we go about doing what you're suggesting, then some of these other things will happen. What are the repercussions? And you let them come to the conclusion of what that means, and if that is the right path of action for the organization or not. And finally, urgency, right? So we talked about the 100-day mindset. We talked about getting things done. Now, when you set up a PMO, we need to make sure that as you're planning through it, as you go about understanding what needs to happen, what you should do, you should plan to go about doing a few things, churning out a few things, so that people not only understand that you're not just all talk, but some action as well. So just have that in mind, and we'll talk more about this right now as we get through into setting up the PMO within 100 days. So having the right attitude, awareness, urgency, and inculcating that 100-day mindset, that is key, and you're ready to set up a PMO. So let's look at that 100-day journey. Now, I do want to make sure that you understand that this is a guide, not a recipe, right? This will work in situations. In some situations, it may not work in some situations, which is fine, right? Assessing the maturity is phase one, and I recommend that that happens within the first 28 days of your setup. Phase two, which is establishing the target set and defining the roadmap, that's the days 21 to 49. Phase three, which is prioritizing and implementing and executing the PMO, are days 35 and 80 to 84. And finally, from days 77 onwards, you're striving for continuous improvement. What you're seeing here, there are some overlaps, which is fine, and that's exactly how it's meant to be, because some of these things can work in parallel, and we'll talk through this as well. But to sort of finish up my point earlier that I was making is, even though you're not able to set up a PMO in 100 days, know that you can't if you know that upfront, because in certain situations, the scope of the PMO, or the number of stakeholders that it manages, or it needs to manage, or even in the size of the organization, could have a massive impact on how much time it takes and what's the pace it requires to move things along. But even with that, understand then what you will accomplish in your first 100 days, and communicate that plan upfront to your team, to your stakeholders, and to your sponsors, and update them on the progress accordingly, so that they know that you have a plan in place, and that you are treading well upon it, right? And if some people question you, hey, why is this taking so long? You have the rationale behind it as well. So irrespectively of whether you're doing something within the first 100 days or more, let's go ahead and talk through all these phases of the PMO setup. So for each phase, what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the key steps that are components of of that phase, and then talk through top 3 checklist items that you have to consider within each phase, right? So starting off with phase 1, which is assessing maturity. What you have to do here is really understand the current state of your PMO. If you don't have a PMO, If it's the first time that your organization is treading towards setting up a PMO, then understand what the current state of the organization is, right? You have to understand what its strengths are, what its weaknesses are, what are the gaps that exist within the processes, within the tools, within how the communication works between departments. Are there any synergies? How decisions get made? What is the nature of projects? Is there even something called a projects within the organization? Understand all of that, and that is the first thing that you have to do. Uh, the success of a PMO is not the fact that you've set up a PMO. It's understanding why the PMO is needed, and only then delivering and building up a PMO that will meet those needs at that specific time for the organization, right? And so in order to do that holistically, don't just take the word of who your sponsor was and say and do things the way they told you. Don't go about replicating what you did for some other organization into your new organization. Make sure that you have identified all your key stakeholders. Those are your sponsors, those are all your peers, and those are all people within your team should you have it. And speak with them. And I don't mean having horrible conversations with them or just going out for coffee. I mean, understand holistically and interview them to understand to determine what the current state of all of these things that I mentioned earlier are, right? The processes, the tools, projects, systems, decisions, technology orientation, etc. Right? And you don't have to ask all the questions to all the people. It can be a good mix based on what those people actually do, what their roles are within the organization, and then based on all what you heard, assess what are the real pain points of the organization. Chances might be that what you heard from your sponsor could be true, but that could be just one component. You may have unearthed a lot of other pieces that the PMO may need to address as well, which your sponsor may or may not be aware of. And so that is the single most important thing that you should do as the very first thing when setting up a PMO. Now, when you go through and understanding what the challenges and pain points of your organization are, you'll get a good sense of what the scope of your PMO may end up to be. And based on that, you may need to determine whether you might need additional team members to help you out with the vision and the rollout of your PMO as well. And then remember, I talked about urgency a few minutes ago. When you come up with some of these issues and pain points, think about what quick wins you could achieve within your first 100 days. Quick wins are those things, those actions, those deliverables that take a short amount of time, but tackle a massive pain point, right? So some of my favorite quick wins for PMOs are, developing a set of project management templates in non-project management speak, in non-project management language, so that people who are not familiar with project management, such as your stakeholders and your sponsors, can relate to them and start working towards completing those to make sure that you start inculcating the level of consistency in through your project deliverables. That's one. Another one that is often seen is the fact that not there is no singular list of projects out there. So nobody has a complete visibility on what projects are happening, and just even developing that could be a massive win, massive quick win for you and for your organization. Sometimes resource management is a massive issue, and people don't know who's working on what and when. And so, coming up with that list, it doesn't have to be ultra detailed right out at the front, but just to get a sense of what the availability of your resources is, what their capacity is, what are they working on. That can really help understand and evaluate the issues within resource management and really provide a stopgap measure to fix that as well. So identifying quick wins that you can achieve within those 100 days is one of the core components of phase one, which is assessing maturity. So phase two is establish target state and define roadmap, right? And here what you need to do is take a step back and understand everything that you've heard in phase one, what people have told you, what you have seen in terms of your own research, what people have not said, what their body language said instead, assessing all of that and compiling all the pain points and determining what trends might emerge, right? Based on that, you can understand what are the priorities that you should address as a PMO leader through your PMO, and carve out the scope of your PMO in terms of its role, its target business areas, even geographic locations, and the type of projects that it should come under. Now, when you go through this is important because what you should do is build this roadmap, build this plan, understand what the roles and responsibilities of your PMO are, and map them to the pain points of the organization, and then present them to your sponsors and all the people that you spoke with, and do a vet again. Hey guys, this is what I heard. This is what you said. This is what I heard from everyone else. What are you guys thinking? And that would be a really good conversation to really sort of tie up the knot on your roadmap and get the approval to move on. Now, one of the things that you should also do as part of defining the roadmap is understand how you're going to measure success, which means whatever the roles and responsibilities of your PMO are, you need to define the metrics and both quantitative as well as qualitative indicators to make sure that you can determine whether your PMO is hitting the mark or not. And so if we're looking at the top 3 checklist items for your PMO setup within phase 2, the first is review and finalize the PMO business case. So which really is taking all that you heard and coming up with a formal document which you can present to all the sponsors and stakeholders and get their sign off on that as well. Now, a lot of people ask me, hey, Hussain, do you have a business case template? What's the best business case template to use, etc. Well, if you already have a business case template that you've seen circulated within the organization, just use that, because the executives are used to seeing things, seeing information in a certain format. Just leverage it. If you don't have anything, make one up, right? There are a few key things that you need within the business case, such as the executive summary, with the methodology you use to come to deliver to come to the approach that you have, what your high level plan is, or your timelines, what are what's the outcome of this PMO setup, so your metrics and performance, who is the team that you're going to be involved with, what are some of the assumptions that you're making, what are some of the risks and issues that you'll face, and to sign off, right? It can be as simple as that. Just put something together, but move on. And then if you determine in phase 1 that you did need a team to make sure that you have help and support to roll out the PMO, now is the time to start hiring those resources. And then we did talk about achieving and identifying some of the quick wins within the first phase. Now within phase 2, you should identify 1 to 2 milestones that you should achieve within the first 100 days. If you're able to set up a PMO within the first 100 days, great. That's one milestone. If you're able to roll it out to just one geographic location or one department, that's a milestone. If you're able to complete just phase 1 for within the first 100 days, because it's the number of stakeholders within that your PMO has to deal with is so much, and it's going to take so much time to develop, to identify, to get people's time and to work with them and to interview them and put together a high level assessment. Then be it, but make sure that you're identifying what those 1 to 2 milestones are and sharing and communicating that within your organization. And then one thing that you don't see out here is the fact that you're achieving some quick wins as well, right? That some of the quick wins you might have already achieved within phase 1, so not just identify them but also achieve them. And if not, then make sure that within phase 2 you have met and achieved some of the quick wins that you talked about. Moving on to phase 3, prioritizing and implementing, right? So this is all about execution. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about is the importance of having a proof of concept and a pilot, right? So don't go about a big bang approach and roll out your PMO all in one shot, right? Even if the scope of your PMO is extremely limited, even then have a proof of concept and a pilot, so that when you do roll it out, you don't run into issues, and you know are able to go about rolling out it in a very seamless way. Now, whether it's doing a proof of concept of certain functionalities of the PMO, whether it's addressing the needs of a specific department or a specific geography, no matter what that scope is, the shortened scope of your PMO, focus on that and roll that out accordingly. Once you've done the proof of concept and the PMO pilot, the next thing that you need to do is understand what went well, what didn't go so well, and then make sure that in your project management plan to roll out your PMO, you incorporate those changes, and then do the full rollout accordingly. If it's again a large PMO structure setup, do it in phases. Um, if it's something that's smaller in nature, if it's for a smaller organization or just focused on a specific geography or department, then you can just go out in one shot, right? Now, as you go about rolling this out to the rest of the organization, when you're going through when you're going through the full rollout, make sure that you have roadshows across the organization. Now, what a roadshow is, not to have some celebratory ice cream and cake parties, but to make sure that you meet with each stakeholder, each department, each sponsor, and tell them, this is why you brought me on board. This is why we talked about having the PMO for. You told me specifically that the PMO should do A, B, and C. We're doing A, B, and D, not C, because of reasons, whatever the reasons might be. But we made sure that we've heard your pain points, and we're going to be releasing them and addressing them by whatever that certain date is. What the beauty of this roadshow is that you are designing it specifically for each sponsor or stakeholder. And so to them, it means that, hey, you know what? You're creating that PMO just for them. And that's exactly how you want them to feel it, right? You want to make sure that the PMO is there for them. That is not some sort of an administrative burden that they have to deal with. It's not because that they have to change so many things that they're working with, because the PMO is going to institute some changes in terms of the way they work and in terms of the way they follow some processes, and in terms of the way they have to receive or dispense information, or the people that they have to deal with, or do some extra work, but because it's helping them meet some of their key needs and resolve some of their biggest pain points. And that in itself is one of the massive wins that you can have, and a major factor in making sure that your PMO gets the buy-in that it deserves. So making sure that your roadshows are really tailored to your sponsors and stakeholders, and that you really, through those roadshows, also understand what your stakeholders really want and incorporate them as you go along is key, right? Making sure that change management here is key, right? It's not about following certain change management methodologies and protocols or frameworks. It's really just making sure that whatever change that those stakeholders have to face because your PMO is now in place, that change is really understood, why that change is happening, by the stakeholders really understand why that change is happening, what they have to do to make sure that they're ready for the change, and that you have given them everything necessary to make that change as easy and seamless as possible. And should they have any issues, you're there and available to support them anytime, right? Those are the keys to making sure that your roadshows are successful, that you get the buy-in that your PMO needs for it to be successful, right? So that is really the core of phase 3, which is prioritizing and implementing the PMO. And then now moving on to phase 4, which is striving for continuous improvement, right? So whatever you've told, whatever you indicated that the PMO would do within the business case, now it's time to start proving that your PMO is getting there. So you have to continuously evaluate your progress, your performance metrics, not just the metrics of how the projects are doing, but how the PMO is doing as well, which means talking about the benefits management of the projects, talking about how much role of the PMO has on the influence of different projects, where can it talk about, and where is it getting involved in the strategy of the company? Is it now expanding into different regions or departments than it should? So those are some of the key progress and indicators of success of a PMO. Now, as you go about evaluating progress, make sure that you're also speaking with all your stakeholders and sponsors and getting feedback, and incorporating that feedback accordingly as well. And one thing that you need to do, besides having your reports, your dashboards, is to make sure that whenever you see success, you're publicizing that success within the organization, because there are very slim chances that besides a few people, or somebody's going to come up to you and say, hey, Mr. or Miss PMO leader, how's everything going? You have to make sure that you are proactive about sharing the success of the PMOs, and you could develop any sort of marketing for that, whether it's sending out a newsletter, whether it's printing out posters and putting them next to the elevator, whether it's sending out specific emails targeted to specific audience, whatever course you might have to do, or have to take, do that, so people do understand, it sticks in people's mind that that PMO is taking action, is making progress, and that they are seeing the benefits of the PMO. Now, every often, whether it's 6 months, 12 months, 18 months or so, start again with determining why the PMO was created, right? So over that time, business needs may have changed for your organization. A new competitor might have come in the market. Its core strategies might have changed. Um, there might be a new regulatory practice that the organization needs to tackle. Some of these changes that I'm addressing, they have to be managed by the PMO as well, right? So the prioritization of the projects then has to shift. The management of the resources then has to change. How you take care of certain things, so certain processes and information, that may need to evolve as well. And so understanding and evaluating the why PMO question every so often is going to make sure that your PMO is always relevant and valid to its organization. If you're holding that business case that you created for when you created the PMO for the first time, and you were that document is still the way it is within 2 years, then that means that you're not doing a good job in making sure that you're addressing the company's needs on an evolutionary and a revolving basis. So that is something that you absolutely have to keep an eye out on as a PMO leader, making sure that your PMO is relevant and valid again for your organization's needs. Now, as the role and responsibilities of your PMO increases over time, you need to make sure that you and your team are also ready for that. So you need to make sure that you have the right skills in place for not just you as well, but also for your team, whether it's the right level of training that's available, the right tools in place, available necessary information, making the right hires. Those are some of the things that you also need to make sure that you keep an eye out on as you evolve your PMO. So there you have it, your 4 phases of setting up a PMO. Now, one stat that continuously haunts me is this one. 50% of PMOs fail within the 3 years of their creation, which to me tells me that I just literally have to flip a coin and determine whether a PMO is going to be successful or not. And you and I know that PMOs are far more valuable to an organization than just that stat, right? So why is it that PMOs fail so often? Why is it that you don't hear anybody else questioning the value of other departments like IT or accounting or marketing or finance, and that only PMO gets stuck within that label, or that extra lens is on the PMOs? Um, there are quite a few reasons for it, but let's talk about 3 common reasons for that. The first one is something that I addressed upon earlier in our conversation, is the lack of buy-in, right? So if you're not understanding the why of the PMO, if you're not delivering and keeping sure that your executives are abreast on the progress, and you keep not keeping them engaged, then the buy-in won't be there. And if without the buy-in, your PMO, no matter how much work you do, all that effort is going to go to waste. So you can overcome this by educating executives on PMOs, what they are, what they can do for the organization, what your PMO can do specifically for your organization based on all the why PMO question that you answered in phase 1, and then making sure that they understand that based on that, the role and responsibility that you've chosen for your PMO are addressing specifically the needs of your organization, not someone else's organization, not what they have seen in previous organizations, not what they've seen in organizations of their peers, but what is needed for your organization. And then the other thing that is so important, like taking back again the question, the situation of where one of my clients, who's a strategy consultant without project management experience, and got to become a PMO leader and set up a PMO successfully, is because he understood the organization and held relationships, strong relationships within the organization. And that is one of the core things. No matter what role you play, if through your career, if through the different things you've done, if people come to trust you and say, you know what, I can give this person anything and I can trust that it's going to get done, that's the level of confidence that your team, your sponsors, and your stakeholders should have in you. Now, there are often situations where PMO leaders are brand new within an organization, and so for that, you have to make an extra effort to make sure that people uh, have that trust and confidence in you, that you build those relationships with your executives and stakeholders, because they will first buy into you before they buy into your ideas. So that's one of the first common reasons, lack of executive buy-in, why PMOs fail. The other thing is perception of slowdown and red tape, right? So that's again a mindset that people have come up to be in, something that they've associate with PMOs. And so one thing that you should really do is whatever you need to do to make sure that things are getting done. They don't have to be done in exactly the way that you prescribed, but as long as they get done, even if you have to, let something slide in the beginning, even if you want to make sure that you're bending yourself backwards to make sure that the culture is met, that is something that you have to focus on, right? And then also, designing the templates that you create in normal talk, right? If your organization is not really mature within the project management discipline, if people don't know about um, project management as such, then design your templates in such a way so that it's in plain English and people understand, right? And then the other thing that you can do is, in every situation, you will always have naysayers, right? No matter if you have, a buy-in from 80% of your stakeholders, you will have 20% or so who are going to be either on the fence or who are going to voice their opinions against you or your PMO. That's totally fine. But whoever you've gotten on your side based on what you've been able to achieve, based on the relationships you've built, based on your proposal and plan, use their opinions, use their voice, leverage those folks to communicate, their positive experiences with the naysayers. So that way you can go ahead and slowly move the needle in terms of getting an overall positive perception and recognition from everyone within the organization. Another common reason of failure is the whole policing piece, right? So yes, you may be there to set standards, you may be there to manage governance for those standards, but you need to understand that things need to, within an organization, may need time for people to address and to shift their mindset, the way they work, the way they accept the change and the way things work. Let me give you an example. One of the clients that I worked with, it was pretty nascent from a project management perspective, and I went ahead and just created a few templates which were extremely detailed, right? And the first time I sort of shared that with my sponsors, and I just got a pretty big gaze and a smile and said, "Hussain, nobody's going to fill this out." And I understood that, and I literally slashed that by 3/4 and got it down to around 2 to 3 pages, and only just talking about some of the core components that we needed. And even if it was the whole point of having that detailed template was the fact that um, I would talk about, consider all different combinations so that when people are going through it, they can literally just focus on those things, just think through that, make sure they don't miss out anything, etc. But the reality was that if somebody looked at an eight-page template, they're just going to flip out. Nobody's going to really fill it out. And the idea is that in order to get people to work through a standard um, way of doing things, you need to make it very easy for them, right? And so even though some of the things might slip up in the more general template that I ended up creating, um, at least it was a step forward to get people towards that standardization, towards that consistency, and eventually over time sort of increase the level of maturity that they are experiencing. So if you go about with a stick right when you start setting up a PMO, and try to make sure that everything gets done, people are going to retaliate. People are not going to be happy, and they are not going to do what you told them. And so that would be a massive blow to your credibility as a PMO leader, to your credibility as a PMO. And that is something that you want to avoid at all costs. Now, we talked about some of the reasons why PMOs fail, and we talked about some of the ways to overcome them. But now let's talk about how you can also boost your chances of success with these quick tips. So quick tip one is having that right mindset. So we talked about the 100-day mindset at the beginning. Let's talk about another mindset here, right? So you also have to make sure that as you're providing your value to leadership, you're also helping your project managers, right? Your project managers are your team, whether it's just project managers, it's program managers, portfolio managers, your portfolio coordinators, your PMO analysts, your business analysts, whoever is on your team, whether it's direct, whether they're reporting directly to you or there's an indirect reporting link to you, you have to be transparent to them, and you have to make sure that there's a balance between serving your leadership and serving your team. You know, you can have the grandest of visions, but if your team doesn't buy into it, then your PMO will fail. And so making sure that you've taken care of your PMs, not just by hearing their concerns as you're setting up the PMO, but also creating the PMO as a safe haven, where project managers and everyone else within your team can come to you and open their heart out, not be judged, share their concerns and frustrations, because we all know that project managers have them when working with other stakeholders, and then helping them through some of those challenges and removing their biggest roadblocks. That's one of the best ways you can serve your project management office, and having that mindset that not forgetting your PMs, your team, is one of the key things that you have to remember. The other quick tip is learning on the job. Now, whether you're a first-time project management office leader or an aspiring PMO leader or someone who's doing it a few times over, learning on the job is always key. It's helped me. Having mentors and coaches has tremendously accelerated the success that I've had in terms of the skill sets that I want to develop, in terms of understanding the lay of the land, in terms of the areas and challenges that I need to keep an eye out on. And I think that that is something that everyone who you speak with, who is some sort of an authority, has been there, done that, will attest to that. Without their mentors or coaches, they would have achieved whatever they did in a longer period of time. So to accelerate your success, look out for mentors within your organization or even outside, or coaches who are specifically geared towards what you want to achieve, because they've been there, done that. They understand what are some of the challenges that you could face. They can provide an objective feedback based on what you see, because sometimes, and that's the beauty of some of the consultants as well, is they bring an outside in perspective, and they bring an objective perspective. Sometimes when you're so close to something, you can't see the bigger picture, and that is something that mentors and coaches can help. And in addition to that, the motivation and inspiration that they provide can really boost you up in a very, very positive way. So second tip is learning on the job, finding the mentors, coaches, understanding what skill sets you can work upon, what are the opportunities for improvement, and constantly evolving you and then once you evolve yourself, you can motivate for your team to evolve as well on their skills, and then eventually raise the level of maturity within your PMO itself. And then finally, delivery. Assemble the right stuff. Now, this is so key, right? There's a saying out there is, it doesn't matter, which direction which direction you're going in. uh, you should have the right people on the bus, because as you go about from point A to B, it's never going to be a straight line. You will always find some challenges, some roadblocks, some detours, but you have the right people on the bus, then they will help you navigate through that. So make sure that you pick people up on your PMO team who understand the company, who understand the data and information that is within it, understand its processes and tools, understand the relationships or have the relationships within the organization, and finally that they buy into your vision of the PMO. Having that team, that A team, even if it takes you some time to develop it, is going to massively help you as a PMO leader and help flourish your PMO. And so that's it from me. To your success, I wish you all the best in your journey as an aspiring PMO leader, as a first-time PMO leader, and I appreciate you coming, saying hi, or any questions or feedback that you have. They're always welcome as well. You have all my information out there. You can connect me via LinkedIn, send me an email, check out my website, or even send me a tweet. And then I also wanted to make sure that you knew that my course on setting up a PMO is now available on LinkedIn Learning, which, as you may know, is LinkedIn's premier online education platform for professional development from all disciplines. It's the first course specifically dedicated to PMOs. I'm humbled and honored to have that opportunity, and I'd love to have you check it out and tell me what you like, what you don't, what are some of the things that you'd like to hear more about on the topic. You can check it out at that link down there. Thank you once again for being a part of the PMO Virtual Summit. Thank you for visiting and checking out my presentation, and I look forward to hearing from you. To your success. Bye-bye.